killer spawn.
Requesting a pickup! I need artillery fire! Artillery requesting a target! Roger that!
Battlefield, a series that has forever changed the way multiplayer games are played. Before DICE introduced the series in 2002, most shooters consisted of little more than deathmatch or capture the flag modes. The sheer size and scale of Battlefield 1942's conflicts were, for the most part, unheard of. Close to a decade with the series, DICE is on the verge of unleashing Battlefield 3 upon the masses. Let's take a look back at the evolution of the franchise, beginning with the revolutionary Battlefield 1942. We'll give an overview of each of the core Battlefield games.
There never has been, I suppose, in all the world, in all the history of war, such an opportunity for youth. The Knights of the Round Table, the Crusaders, all fall back into the past. Not only distant, but present.
To understand Battlefield 1942's heritage, we've got to go back to its predecessor, codename Eagle. While the game received only marginally good reception on its release around the turn of the millennium, the alt history Great War shooter laid the groundwork upon which developer Refraction Games, which is now part of DICE, would build the first entry in the Battlefield series. Though reviews weren't exactly singing its praises, a small community built up around the game's multiplayer aspect, and many of those design decisions would carry over into the studio's next game. Simply put, had there been no codename Eagle, there may have been no Battlefield series at all, at least in its current form. (1942's original design called for huge 120-player maps, many times larger than the ones eventually released, a casualty of both gameplay practicality and technology's limitations. Joining the relatively vast levels on the cutting room floor were multiple classes, including a pilot team member who may have had exclusive access to the team's planes. A concern of the team was the jarringly unrealistic spawning of vehicles, so early designs included tank factories and shipyards that would have masked the magical apparition of the game's ships and war machines. As things were cut, however, the team's vision began to take shape and more closely resemble its eventual final form. The studio struggled to convince publishers of 1942's value and strength of vision, as Battlefield was an unproven concept at an early stage of development. It wasn't until 2 years later, at the summer 2002 launch of the game's multiplayer demo, that things started to really gain momentum. The team was in a crazed rush to kick the finished code out the door, still unsure of how it might be received. In the nail-biting hours and days following the demo's release, the player statistics began to skyrocket, and it became clear the game struck a chord with a lot of gamers. Playing Battlefield 1942 for the first time redefined what a multiplayer game could be. Control points were thrust into the limelight as a core gameplay focus, Teamwork was cemented as a key mechanic in perhaps the most successful way up until this point. Sure, you had games like Team Fortress that promoted teamwork and class-based gameplay, but nothing had been done on this scale before. Playing a medic was so radically different from playing an assault class, and for the first time, cooperation kicked Twitch-based skills out of the driver's seat. From our perch here in the future, 1942 may be best defined by the features it didn't have. Squad leaders were out, and any sort of organization was entirely up to the judgment of the clan or group running the team. Compared to some of the hierarchical structures built into some of the later Battlefield games, it was a free-for-all in a lot of ways. This was more of a problem for the often chaotic public servers than some of the more strictly governed clan-run ones. But the features DICE pumped out to address the issues for the sequels were certainly welcome. For a series that helped pioneer persistent unlocks, personal awards, and multiplayer progression, 1942 shows no signs of these things that were later to come. As revolutionary as the game was, it clung tightly to a lot of old-school game design pillars, sometimes devolving to feel like a really big deathmatch rather than a fight for territory. Popping in and out of servers with no care for a kill-death ratio or which gun unlock comes next was the norm of the day, and 1942 was no exception. There was hardly a single player to speak of, unless killing brain-dead bots in a multiplayer map sounds like fun. Graphically speaking, 1942 never stood up to even its contemporaries. While the draw distance was impressive, animations were goofy and added to the hilarity of an enemy death. Textures were stretched pretty thin, and the game's visual detail couldn't hold a candle to more tightly scripted titles like Medal of Honor, Allied Assault, or even console games like Metroid Prime. But it didn't matter to its millions of buyers, sacrificing a bit of visual fidelity for the satisfaction of a successful, coordinated tank rush involving dozens of teammates was a no-brainer. The game launched with 17 different maps, though like most popular multiplayer games, a select few quickly rose to the top of most server lists. Lots of servers favored Wake Island, Midway, Al Alamein, and Battle of the Bulge soon after launch. DICE had some 24 weapons ready for the launch of the game, as well as nearly 36 vehicles among tanks, ships, light vehicles, and aircraft. Even though later games pared down the number of maps, it didn't make much difference since the majority of maps in 1942 were ignored by many servers. The gaming press was sold on Battlefield 1942's unique blend of arcade action and strategic team play. IGN wrote, "The game is a perfect bet for fans of online action." GameSpot praised it in spite of some glitches, saying, "Assuming Battlefield 1942's technical kinks get worked out, the game could easily take its rightful place among the very best online shooters." It's hard to imagine the past decade in gaming without Battlefield, and 1942 kicked it all off with several million copies sold. It was a remarkable achievement and influenced games for years to come. The later, multiplayer-focused Call of Duty games, the Star Wars Battlefront series, and Enemy Territory are just a few examples. As for the game itself, DICE continued to support it post-release with balancing and content patches, plus 2 paid expansion packs, The Road to Rome, and Secret Weapons of World War II.
Fire out! Attack the enemy position! Fire! Incoming! Ah!
Sweet concentration camps with bloodhounds, night lamps bumping in the cold and damp.
I'd be remiss not to mention the mod community. From minor tweaks to maps to ambitious total conversions, half the fun of the 1942 experience was just seeing what the modders could come up with next. Announced on June 18, 2003, just 6 months after 1942 made a splash in the industry, Battlefield Vietnam promised to bring the franchise into a new era with more firepower and beautiful yet ferocious new combat settings. If there are 2 adjectives to describe how we like our Battlefield, they are beautiful and ferocious without a doubt. In keeping with this goal, the design team pushed hard to design maps that were immersive and emotionally engaging for players. Intimate, close combat heavy maps were the bread and butter of Vietnam, a shift from the sprawling Guadalcanals and midways of 1942. Lead designer A.J. Marini was hopeful that this design would both captivate gamers as well as sidestep some of the previous game's dullness when a player was away from the heat of battle, stating that the Vietnam War was a much more close combat war than World War II, and that there would still be plenty of space to move around, but that there would be less likelihood of being off by yourself in a far corner of the map. Also in the blueprints for the new game was an improved AI system, which DICE hoped would give players more control over and interaction with bots. The Swedish game developer sunk a lot of time into Vietnam's extensive list of planned features: an enhanced infantry experience and gun feel, brand new helicopters with their own physics modeling, more realistic ballistics, a movable spawn point, and high-fidelity DirectX 9 graphics. Additionally, to preserve the integrity of the Vietnam War setting, DICE de-emphasized naval combat and funneled more resources into the air and ground war. During development, the team claimed they weren't just dragging and dropping 1942 into a Vietnam setting, and this approach was abundantly clear in the final product. Gone were the rumbling tank rushes and booming naval bombardments. In their place were guerrilla-style ambushes and devastating napalm strikes. Vietnam was a very different war, and Vietnam was a very different game. Arguably the coolest aspect of the game was the ability to ferry troops via Huey helicopters, dropping squads off in hot zones and zipping away for more men before the enemy could down the craft. There were transports in the first game, sure, but there was a much heavier emphasis on squad-based combat and small tactics in its sequel. Vietnam wasn't a huge leap forward for the series. It was more of a refining process for the vision of the original game. Some might call it a step sideways, a different angle on 1942's expansive battles, fine-tuning the small arms combat, and rearranging the balance of the game's vehicles and units. Much like the game that preceded it, it wasn't a meticulously balanced, competitive-focused title, but rather a playground for teamwork and exciting vehicle combat. And unlike the relatively even teams of Battlefield 1942 before it, Vietnam crafted each side to play entirely different from the other. The Americans did what they do best even today: loud, explosive machines. In contrast, the Vietnamese armies had to rely on nimble guerrilla tactics and anti-armor equipment. A Vietnam experience wouldn't be complete without 60s-era music, and this Battlefield game delivered. If the new helicopter combat wasn't engaging enough, it was made all the sweeter when blasting "I Fought the Law." Get ready. Or Wild Thing.
Wild thing, you make my heart sing. You make everything groovy. Wild thing.
There's something oddly poetic about infecting the virtual battlefield with deadly napalm while the Kinks or Creedence Clearwater Revival blare from the PC speakers, and the tone and atmosphere reflected period films nicely.
Girl, I want to be with you all of the time. The only time I feel alright is by your side.
The jungles were lush and brilliant, a far cry from 1942's sometimes barren landscapes. Worth Playing recommended the game to dedicated fans of the series, writing, "The new graphics engine, coupled with helicopters that don't require a degree in rocket science to learn how to fly them, make the game a big win for me." Technical issues aside, Battlefield Vietnam is an excellent addition to a great series. Action Trip was more put off by the gameplay changes, saying, "By setting things up the way they did in the game, DICE kind of gambled a little as this slightly altered style of gameplay may backfire and eventually put off some of the fans that were really only interested in land or specifically armored combat in 1942. The game sold 1 million copies in the first 4 months alone. While DICE didn't pile on the expansions for this one, there was a nice treat in the form of the Redux re-release, which included a 1942-inspired World War II mod for the updated Vietnam engine. Mod development didn't take off as much as it did for the first game, and ModDB lists roughly 4 times as many mods for 1942 than its sequel. Some of this may be due to mods still being in development for the first game, and some because DICE announced Battlefield 2 no more than a month after Vietnam's release. To some, it may have seemed more like a Battlefield 1.5 stopgap rather than a fully supported retail release. Despite its short time in the limelight, Vietnam set up the framework for the full-blown sequel to the now well-established franchise. Many of its advancements, small as they may have been, were foundational for the significant tweaking and reworking of the series' mechanics. Years later, DICE would return to the Southeast Asian jungles in a Vietnam-based expansion pack for multi-platform shooter Bad Company 2.
Initiating satellite scan. Camera deployed. Link establishing. Satellite coming down in 3, 2, 1.
On April 20th, 2004, just 1 month after Vietnam's release, DICE unveiled Battlefield 2, set for a spring 2005 release. In September of 2004, the game developer surprised the industry by purchasing Trauma Studios, the team behind the popular 1942 mod Desert Combat, for a cool $500,000. The talented modding collective would prove invaluable in Battlefield 2's development. DICE quickly put the guys to work testing features for the new game in the old engine, which the core team would then port over. Additions like the RTS-inspired Battlefield Commander were first done by the Desert Combat team, who employed their extensive 1942 engine experience to prototype many of the sequel's concepts. As the final build began to take shape, the emphasis on a virtual chain of command with the commander at the top was crystallized in game code. To buttress this system, a reworked voice-over IP system was built from scratch, restricting most forms of communication to a soldier's local squad. This system was to be preferred over a loud cacophony of shouts and slurs echoing across the digital front lines. DICE continued to pile on the already extensive lists of features with Punkbuster integration, a full set of mod tools before release, deep customization options, and huge 4-kilometer-wide maps. All of this was built on the brand new Refractor 2 game engine, which DICE hoped would provide excellent, minute detail across the vast playable areas. Sadly, DICE dissolved Trauma Studios just days before Battlefield 2's release, casting what some would call a shadow over an otherwise bright moment for the series. Having since been unable to stay above controversy and turbulence, the talent behind Trauma went on to release Frontlines Field of War and Homefront, neither of which received generous accolades as Desert Combat and Battlefield 2 had. Their new studio was shuttered a few months ago. As 1942 changed the shooter genre forever, so its first full-blown sequel yanked the Battlefield franchise in a new direction, moving the series from fun, chaotic historical combat to intense, organized modern warfare. The focused development time had paid off. Soldiers arranged in loose hierarchies on public servers, not to mention players strictly governed in finely tuned war machines in the better clans, provided a tighter combat focus and a more streamlined combat experience. With Battlefield 2, DICE picked up the beloved one-off multiplayer experience and tossed it clean out the window. Persistent stat tracking, while not a first for multiplayer games, brought the idea of unlocks into the gaming spotlight. We all feel the aftershock of this decision, even today, as more and more games seek to offer carrot-on-a-stick items and weapons that precious kills and experience points can purchase. Ranking up became a coveted prize for hours spent on a server, replacing the simple satisfaction of helping one's team achieve victory, for good or for ill. While DICE only shipped Conquest mode with the game, it was the only mode that really mattered. By this time, the respawn ticket attrition mechanic and the scattered control point structure were widely recognized as the gameplay meat on the series' bones. The Commander mode, while not exactly revolutionary on some of the public servers, was a welcome addition, if even just to take a break from the gripping gunplay from time to time. When a squad worked together to assault a base correctly, it was a genuinely thrilling experience that has come to define the franchise.
Contact! Go, go, go! Your objective is to advance to this position.
reception for the game was extremely positive, with gamers hell saying Battlefield 2 is easily the best online experience I've ever had. Even with a few shortcomings, Battlefield 2 is still a step ahead of the rest. GameSpot was extremely impressed with the intense combat, saying that you'll experience the hellish shelling of artillery, see the desperate revival of wounded colleagues, and be killed a dozen grisly ways. And yet through it all, you'll find yourself coming back for more.
Okay, Alpha Team, move out.
DICE developed a spin-off subtitled Modern Combat for consoles later that same year. Hitting the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and 360, the game for the first time integrated a full-fledged single-player campaign, and by most accounts, successfully translated the fierce combat of its PC sister to a gamepad slinger-friendly format. Though not as huge as the Bad Company games that would follow in its footsteps, it played an important role in helping DICE gain mindshare among console gamers. The Swedish developer didn't entirely abandon its PC roots, though. The team continued to support Battlefield 2 in the form of patches and free DLC. Those patches were certainly needed. Complaints of memory leaks, connection errors, crashes to desktop, and dozens of bugs flooded internet message boards. Still, the gaming press received retail expansion Special Forces warmly. The content pack provided some zany Spec Ops tools like zip lines, grappling hooks, and tear gas. If Battlefield was a force to be reckoned with before BF2, it was a monster afterwards. Amid a flurry of rumors, DICE pulled the curtain back on its next project in March of 2006, Battlefield 2142.
The 22nd century was to be a golden age. We never expected the ice. It spread everywhere. Nations fought over the last remaining land. I remember this.
Set a century and a half into the future, the game promised to put us in the shoes of fighters for various coalitions squabbling over the Earth's shrinking inhabitable landmass. DICE envisioned a plausible version of future combat, focusing on improved and optimized versions of today's guns rather than laser rifles and lightsabers. Riding the wave of popularity the game had seen since Battlefield 2's success and the company's introduction to consoles, the series broke 9 million copies sold during development. As release date approached, the team made clear their commitment to the franchise's growing community, even bringing in top clans and enthusiasts to help beta test and fine-tune the new game's balance. Keeping a close eye on favorite features of Battlefield 2, DICE began work beefing up the reward system. New weapon unlocks, medals, badges, and an enhanced commander mode closely tied to the massive Titans were all a result of player feedback on previous games in the series. Just a few weeks before 2142 hit store shelves, the business side of DICE saw major changes. EA completed its acquisition of the developer on October 2, 2006, taking on the new name of EA Digital Illusions CE. The new owner shut down DICE Canada entirely, the studio responsible for Battlefield Vietnam and Battlefield 2 Special Forces, and which was home for 28 employees. As Vietnam was to 1942, so 2142 was to Battlefield 2. Less of a ground-up sequel and more of a carefully constructed mod of sorts, 2142 brought one big improvement to the series: Titan Mode. When we gamers all turn old and gray and tell war stories to our kids, Titan Mode will no doubt be the subject for those tales of yore. Offering players two methods to destroy the Titans, either by capturing control point like missile silos and winning a long war of attrition, or by infiltrating the Titan on foot. The assault-like setup, consisting of concrete objectives within the game world, rather than abstract respawn tickets like Conquest Mode, injected a real sense of challenge and accomplishment into the battles. The game offered 13 maps and tons of new vehicles, including the awesome new mechs. Employing smart strategies, players could turn these battle walkers into vehicles of destruction and death, whether from its Gatling guns or its powerful missiles. They also had anti-aircraft guns and EMP weaponry. The mighty mech took two to pilot and command all its weapons in tandem. If 1942 was a lawless playground full of vehicles to toy around with, 2142 was the more focused, streamlined counterpart. It didn't abandon the wide-open maps or the players' freedom to formulate their own tactics, but it was a far more balanced game. Teamwork was essential, and those clans and pub teams with skillful coordination were likely to decimate the opposing force's Titans in no time. Conquest Mode was here too, but again, Titan was the real star of the show. Reception for 2142 was mixed. While Titan Mode was universally acknowledged as a great addition, reviewers questioned the decision on charging full price for a small step forward in gameplay. Firing Squad wrote that the game contained an infantry experience that is significantly less compelling than Battlefield 2, and stated that there were areas where it came together, like on the Titans, but in general, they were disappointed with infantry play. Game Informer wrote that in nearly every way, a round of 2142 played out exactly like a round of its predecessor. They added that this wasn't a particularly bad thing, but that for all intents and purposes, it was a $50 mod. The game has sold over 2 million copies, and it proved to PC gamers DICE was still serious about their prized platform. Even though 2142 is sometimes the forgotten child of the franchise, sandwiched between the console-focused Bad Company series and the revered Battlefield 2, it captivated a portion of the Battlefield fanbase in a way many of the other entries could only dream of. Let's hope that Battlefield 3 is crafted with the same love and attention to detail and balance that DICE poured into 2142.
Creators of the multiple award-winning games Battlefield 1942 and Battlefield 2 comes a new epic adventure combining the trademark addictive gameplay.
Never stop talking, just shut up!
Spurred on by the success of the company's previous console outing, DICE made the decision to jump into the market with both feet, designing Bad Company from the ground up as a console exclusive.
Sweetwater, Haggard, Sergeant Redford. They're really great guys.
Gamers reacted to the first trailers with disbelief.
Now can we focus on staying alive here, please?
Sarge!
What?
Incoming!
A Battlefield game for consoles with a humorous single-player campaign?
Guys, I'm sure I saw a guy with an eye patch hiding inside that barrel.
What? No.
Why would somebody hide in a barrel?
See? Did you see that? What?
Some were unsure if the PC-centric developer could pull it off. When finishing up Modern Combat, The development team made the call early on to streamline the sandbox gameplay from 1942 for easy digestion in a single-player experience.
Whoa. Hold the phone here. You just said we can blow up anything?
Pretty much.
Anything.
Pretty much anything.
Destructible environments, a first for the series, were in the plans from the beginning. The developers put considerable emphasis on avoiding the overly scripted die and reload repetition of Battlefield's competitors, instead opting to offer the player options in how they wish to approach the enemy.
Lay down your arms or we will take you by force.
Says you and what army?
What?
I just always wanted to say that.
If DICE was to successfully follow up its first console game, the team knew they would have to build a new engine to optimize the code for console hardware. Enter Frostbite 1.0, the first version of the game engine that would provide the underpinnings for the next few games of the series. The internal Tools and Technology programming group coded the engine with destructibility, efficiency, and open game world capabilities at the forefront of the development goals. The new Frostbite engine was a massive improvement over the old Refractor engine employed in the older games. The team had promised to deliver a fully destructible environment, and they mostly delivered on that lofty promise. While elements that were important to story or gameplay were off limits, walls, small structures, and fences could be totally obliterated. It was a far cry from the invincible walls and gates of its ancestors. Even though the game didn't hit the PC and so suffered from what many would consider poor controls, it looked great. The new engine was a huge improvement on the old one's visuals all the way around. Sadly, DICE limited the player count to 24. Luckily, multiplayer wasn't the only option, as a fleshed-out single-player story was built for the game, exceeding even modern combat's attempts at a lone wolf mode.
Different textures between soft donuts.
Could you get your ass over here right now?
Did you lose something, Sarge? You dropped something, Sarge?
This is supposed to be a stealth mission.
The game's AI coding wasn't perfect, but it was entirely serviceable for a one-off, fun gaming experience. But multiplayer is where the magic happens in the Battlefield series, and Bad Company was no exception. The entire PC experience was here in spades, incorporating ranks, classes, awards, and of course, vehicles of mass destruction. Unfortunately, jets and other aircraft, except helicopters, were left on the cutting room floor for Bad Company, not to be seen again until Battlefield 3.
Hide my head, I wanna drown my...
Despite noting some mechanical problems, most reviewers were impressed by DICE's efforts in the console arena. Destructoid wrote that it may be great to laugh at the cut scenes and exploits of the protagonists, but that it was not funny to struggle with the AI, plot, or core mechanics of the game. Armchair Empire praised the single-player and multiplayer modes alike, writing that the game had an actual single-player mode gamers would want to play to the end, and more of the same great Xbox Live gameplay that was found in Battlefield 2 Modern Combat.
Hey, shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Sorry. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. What does that mean? What does it mean? Yeah, well, it's a dream. How about this song? Mama's little baby loves shortening, shortening. Mama's little baby loves shortening bread.
The game was a success, selling over 1.6 million copies in the first few months alone. Battlefield, a PC-only franchise from the beginning, had made the leap to consoles in a big way. DICE wasn't satisfied with stopping there, though, and immediately set to work on a Bad Company sequel, this time to hit PC as well.
So bye, everybody, and I love you.
Announced in 2009, the follow-up to Bad Company was poised to make a triumphant return for the franchise to the PC, though consoles were still the lead development platform. Listening to their customers, the folks at DICE were careful to ensure a proper PC version this time around. DICE confirmed dedicated server support early on. Having Frostbite already built meant more work could be put into polishing and refining the game itself. While single-player was enhanced with deeper characters and more humor, the team realized the key to success was through the multiplayer component. The developers put a lot of work into Destruction 2.0, a two-level system that was designed to allow players to both take down entire structures as well as chip away at low ledges of cover. DICE built the system from the ground up to integrate with the gameplay. It wasn't simply seen as a pretty feature, but an important part of the tactics and the battle's intensity.
A simple support mission, they said.
It's a fake, what you found.
Fake, sir?
Dummy. We think it's a dry run.
Nothing's ever really that simple, though.
DICE poured all the company's knowledge, experience, and hard work into Bad Company 2, and the results paid off in the gameplay. It took the beloved Battlefield sandbox combat system dating all the way back to 1942 and reworked it to incorporate the loads of progress the company had made since then. It had the humor of Bad Company, the balance of 2142, and the finely proven frostbite and destruction technology all rolled into one tempting package. The game had more game types than before, though Conquest was still the star of the show. Multiple rush modes, in addition to deathmatch and a co-op onslaught mode, were available, the latter for the consoles only. DICE refused to rest on its laurels and continued to beef up the popular persistent stats and reward system, perpetually dangling a carrot in front of players to keep people interested. Single player was much improved as well, with enhanced friendly AI and a more focused storyline. Even though it still wasn't perfect, it seemed as if DICE had finally found the sweet spot between wild, open environments and more driven linear gameplay. The storyline was insane and took players all over the world, but it was a satisfying romp and a great preparation for the endless multiplayer warfare that lay ahead. Reviewers worldwide immediately recognized the game for its many improvements over the first Bad Company. Cheat Code Central declared, "The combat is fun, the characters are great, and there is a ton of gaming value shoehorned into this disc. Battlefield Bad Company 2 is a worthy sequel to the original." Eurogamer wrote, "The improvements over the previous game are immediately evident. Unlike Modern Warfare 2's disjointed compilation of set pieces, Bad Company 2 plays like a whip-smart Shane Black script from the late 80s. Battlefield Bad Company 2 captured an audience above and beyond the one the first game was able to. Part of this was due to the PC version. Part of it, the additional support DICE provided after release, including DLC, map packs, and even a full Vietnam expansion. Though we may never know for sure, it's entirely possible Battlefield 3 was greenlit only because of Bad Company 2's enormous success. Had the project failed, it certainly would have cast doubt on EA's decision to invest tons of cash in its successor. It surely helped that the game has sold almost 10 million copies since its release, making it the biggest financial triumph in the series' long history.
I remember this. The chaos.
Clear!
EA announced the existence of Battlefield 3 over 2 years ago, and a steady trickle and sometimes a flood of news has come our way since then. We learned that PC was to be the lead platform in contrast to console-exclusive Bad Company and console-led Bad Company 2.
This is not a trial. You are guilty. I know how your fucking story is.
We've watched video after video of the capabilities of the Frostbite 2 engine, and excitement is running high among the shooter community. While we can't say at this point whether DICE will be able to follow through on all the company's lofty promises, the game is showing lots of potential now, just 1 day before release. Jets are making a return at long last. The player count has been increased, and DICE is still hard at work implementing changes from the alpha testers' feedback. We can only hope the next game in the franchise will be able to stand proudly among its peers. The folks at PC Gamer were impressed with their hands-on time with the preview build, saying that the good news was that it plays well, and that it's familiar enough to instantly make you fall into some of the same routines: shoot, spot, move to cover. They added that it has improvements to the feel of the game that make it a significant step up from Battlefield Bad Company 2. Delta Gamer's Tom Yates wrote that the combat leans more towards Bad Company 2 than Battlefield 2, but the reintroduction of prone and 64-player maps give it that old-school Battlefield feel.
The situation is this. We lost contact with Jackson's squad. They were investigating a lead on a possible chem weapons site at Grid 80.
Battlefield 3 looms large in the distance, and it's exciting to think what the next decade of the series holds for us. DICE, in just under 10 years' time, has gone from making casual pinball games to working for EA on one of the biggest shooter franchises in gaming history. The company has spread its wings from PC development to consoles without leaving its computer gaming roots entirely. Aside from the core games in the series, EA has pumped out spin-offs like Battlefield Heroes, which took the series in a new direction with a free-to-play model, third-person gameplay, and a cartoonish look. Battlefield Online offers Koreans an improved version of Battlefield 2 with up to 100 players at a time. Battlefield Play for Free also revamps Battlefield 2's engine with a microtransaction-based Battlefield experience, though its setting is grittier than the zany cartoon look of Heroes. Of course, the downloadable console-only Battlefield 1943 took players back to the Pacific Theater, bringing all the Frostbite engine's improvements to some classic 1942 maps. Whether or not you are a fan of the Battlefield series, its far-reaching influence on the industry is simply undeniable. It seems every other modern shooter incorporates elements borrowed from the franchise into its multiplayer mode, whether it's control point-based game modes or persistent stat and unlocks. While Battlefield wasn't the first to do most of these features, it was the first series to bring everything together in a well-made package. Looking ahead, one can't help but to look back to the magic of the first game, wondering how DICE will manage to recapture that revolutionary gameplay in Battlefield 3 and beyond.
I'm grinding until I'm tired. They say you ain't grinding until you die. So I'm grinding with my eyes wide, looking to find a way through the day.
And what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration of freedom in history of
said that war never changes. They were wrong. To celebrate the release of Battlefield 3, Gamers Spawn will be counting down the days until launch from October 21st. We'll be looking at the ways in which Battlefield 3 looks set to shake up the balance of multiplayer and single-player warfare, from the ground to the skies above. It's been one of the most anticipated titles for years, and we're going to show you why. Join us. Battlefield 3 is coming.
Holy shit!